So as I said earlier, I want to talk today about earning your salvation. But I could equally have called this address Doing Nothing About Your Salvation Too. Before I continue, I should ask, did anybody spot the connection between the children's talk and what I read from the Word? The half shekel, well done. I thought you might pick it up. So there was reference there to the half shekel being given. And that's really what I'm going to dwell on today in my address. So as I say, talking about earning our salvation, the other side of it is doing nothing about our salvation. In the teachings of the church, Swedenborg talks about the idea of heresy and what heresy is. And this is what he says: wherever a church exists, heresies arise in it as a consequence of people basing their thinking on one particular article of faith to which they attach supreme importance. In other words, we tend towards an imbalance in our faith, an imbalance in our religion. We tend to go one of two ways when we need to actually hold both together. So we tend to think that we don't need to do anything about our salvation, that everything is done by the Lord for us. Or, on the other hand, we think that we earn our salvation and somehow we merit or we deserve to get into heaven. And yet we need to hold these two ideas together. There's a balance to be struck. So we are to do what is good. We are to shun what is evil to the best of our ability, yet all the while we have to acknowledge the Lord's part in that process, even though it is unseen at times. So we read the faith of the new church this morning, and if you remember that last part of the faith, and these are to be done by man as if from himself, but it ought to be believed that they are from the Lord, working in man and by him. There is the two sides that we need to hold together. Another idea that Swedenborg refers to is what he calls influx into effort. In other words, the Lord flows into our efforts, our trying to work things through for ourselves. And it's a very important thing for us to bear in mind. Influx into effort. So I want to refer this morning to the tax on the people when they are numbered. Now, I didn't read the whole of Exodus chapter 30. If I had, you would notice it's placed in a rather odd way. Exodus chapter 30 talks about the furniture of the tabernacle and of the temple. It begins with the altar of incense. Then there's the little section about the ransom money. And then it goes on to the bronze laver, which is where the priests would wash their hands and make sure they were clean. Then it talks about the anointing oil, and then it talks about the incense. So it's kind of oddly placed. But I think the reason that it's where it is because when it refers to the altar of incense, it speaks about in verse 10, so just before what I read this morning, and Aaron shall make atonement upon its horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonement. Once a year he shall make atonement upon it throughout your generations. It is most holy to the Lord. And then it goes on to the half shekel tax, if you like, or the half shekel offering, which then supports the work of the tabernacle. So that's the connection there, but when you read it at first, it feels a bit odd. It so happens that I'm in this section as I'm reading through Heavenly Secrets at the moment myself, and I came across it during the week, and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. This is exactly what I'm looking for. This half shekel tax. Now, it mentions people who are 20 years and older. And we're talking about a stage of life. So Swedenborg talks about 4 stages of life, and I'll just read them to you, or I'll give you a sense of what they are. The first stage is 0 to 5 years. So Veda's a great example for us, a first stage of life. And he says that it is a state of ignorance and also of innocence within ignorance. Only the most external levels, that is, those of the senses, are open in that youngest part of life, the youngest stage of life. Then the second state, he says, from 5 to 20 years. So this is a state of instruction and learning where knowledge is acquired. But the young person does not arrive at any conclusions by himself, nor draw any distinction between one truth and another, nor even between truth and falsity, only with the help of others. So a person who is learning is reliant upon the teacher or the parent to guide them in what they are thinking and how they should act even. You think about what happens in those years between 5 and 20. We move from that total reliance on our parents to independent adulthood. Now that independent adulthood is the third stage at age 20, and he makes a distinction between 20 years and 60 years. And this is what he says about this third state. Is a state in which understanding exists because the person now thinks for himself, drawing distinctions and arriving at conclusions, and the conclusions are his, not another's. At this time, belief begins, for belief is not a person's own until he has confirmed what he believes with ideas that are the product of his own thinking. And this is the line that he draws at 20 years of age. And then at 60 and above is the last state, is one of wisdom and of innocence within wisdom, which exists when a person is no longer concerned just to gain an understanding of truth and forms of good, but he is concerned to make them part of his will and life. For then the person has wisdom. And how far that person is able to make them part of his will and life depends on how much innocence he has. That is, on how far he believes that left to himself he has no wisdom at all, but that whatever wisdom he has is derived from the Lord, and also on how far he loves this to be so. Now, I just want to say, observe about that division into 4 stages. It's very stage 1, ends and starts stage 2. It's chopped up into bits, but I'm not sure it's quite so clear and obvious as that. There is a progression between these stages. And we do see it in that second stage of childhood. So for example, at 5, the child beginning school, they have they put their parents and their teachers on a pedestal. They look up to these people and they tend to be guided by them. But then you go into the teens and it's quite different, isn't it? It's an entirely different matter. They don't hold their parents and their teachers in quite so much esteem. However, they are moving to their peers, and the others that they seek wisdom from are their peers rather than their elders. And then, of course, the next stage into adulthood is then to their own thinking. So there's a progression through that. So in each of these stages, there's a progression. And what I haven't read in this passage is Swedenborg talks about the way one builds on top of the other. And there's a very definite progression between the states, between the stages. But the half shekel offering comes in at age 20. Why? Because it represents the fact that we attribute something to the Lord. And it is the wealth of knowledge that we possess, our ability to process things for ourselves, even though it seems to us that we are entirely capable of standing on our own 2 feet mentally and rationally, we recognize in some way that the Lord is responsible for it. The Lord is in there. And that's that half shekel offering. It's just a little thing, but it recognizes that the Lord is the seat and the origin of all of our wisdom, which ultimately is where we aim to get to in that latter stage of life, what Swedenborg talks about, the 60 and above years. I'm going to read again a little bit further on in this passage. Swedenborg's talking about this offering. Everyone possesses the ability to understand and be wise. But the reason why one person may be wiser than another is that they are not alike in attributing to the Lord all that constitutes understanding and wisdom. All forms of good and truth constituting wisdom flow in from heaven, that is, from the Lord there. The attribution of them all to the Lord opens the inner levels of a person's mind towards heaven. For that attribution involves the acknowledgement that no truth or good at all come from self. And in the measure that this is acknowledged, self-love departs, and along with it, the thick darkness resulting from falsities and evils. In the same measure also, the person attains innocence, love to the Lord, and faith in Him. As a result of this, the person is linked to the divine, who then flows in, bringing enlightenment. There's a lovely passage in here where Swedenborg speaks of, get this, the ignorance of wisdom. The ignorance of wisdom. In other words, it's acknowledging that nothing of wisdom that I have comes from me. It comes entirely from the Lord. The ignorance of wisdom. So every person in that third state of being able to process the world for himself or herself must be able to acknowledge the Lord as the source of wisdom and not ourselves. And that really is what we're talking about here. So there's this as of self process going on. I'm busy thinking for myself, but I am attributing to the Lord everything that I think that is good and true. So a couple of examples for you to finish off. I remember, and I've possibly talked about this before, the Gideon Society coming to our high school and handing out their little New Testament and Psalms. And we talk about, don't we, salvation as a free gift. And this was a free gift. But I remember how many of those ended up in the bin that day. See, even with a free gift, it requires acceptance and receiving of the gift, and that is our response. You have that passage that I read from Matthew's Gospel, the workers in the vineyard. The ones who'd worked there all day and felt they deserved more. So they saw the people who'd been hired at the very end of the day receiving their denarius, and they thought, oh, I'm in for a windfall. I'm going to get 12 denarius. Wasn't that going to be lovely? I can give my family a good slap-up meal in the evening. And yet they receive one. Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." But we need to remember it's still a burden. There's still an element of something we have to carry. And one of my favourites from Revelation, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." It's not the end of the story. "If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him and he with me." And it's built into the nature of love itself. From Divine Love and Wisdom, this is paragraph 47. "The essence of love is not to love self, but to love others, and through love to be conjoined with them. It is also the essence of love to be loved by others, for thus is conjunction achieved. So the Lord loves us, but part of that love is a yearning for it to be returned, and that is our part in the process. And the final thing I'll mention is the Holy Supper. And I think it's worth us remembering as we approach the Holy Supper this morning. The Holy Supper is this image, and our acceptance of bread and wine and our taking them into our bodies and ingesting them is our part in the process. So we're not powerless, we're not robots that are just going about the bidding of this master. We are given agency, we're given freedom, we're given choice. And this is our choice, to approach the table of the Holy Supper and to accept from the Lord all that he has to offer us.